snowballs?
Yeah.
Snowballs? Where's the Twinkies?
You realize what you've done to my wife?
I am not looking for trouble. I am but a humble gato in search of his next meal. Perhaps you gentlemen can help me find a single score.
Go on, boys, chop his head off. Right, silly little feeder. One rabbit stew coming right up. Jesus Christ!
Once again, in honor of Easter, we play that clip for a little pre-Easter infotainment. Hi, I'm Mark, and I am the Cinemaniac. I am a Cinemaniac, you are a Cinemaniac. Collectively, we are the titular Cinemaniacs. So we have a shorter list than usual today, although I think I might have actually more to say than normal about a lot of these things. So we're going to jump right in and swing. Oh, that's really well done. Bravo. We're going to jump right into this first film. This is an updating, a first time on the big major motion picture screen for a superhero that some of us grew up with, some of us have never heard of. It tells the story of what happens when young Billy Batson is given the power of the gods by saying the mighty word and becoming a superhero. Problem is the kid's 14. And he's not quite ready to be a superhero. He's still kind of a kid in a man's body. And hilarity ensues in a film entitled Shazam. So I grew up, when I was a little kid on Saturday mornings on CBS, there was the Filmation Shazam, which was about a hip-looking young dude and this older guy who was his mentor, cleverly titled Mentor, and they rode around the Southwest in a Winnebago, and they helped kids, and they told lessons and everything. And as a little kid, I loved it, because it was like Superman on TV every week for me. Little did I know that this has had a long history. Shazam goes way back. I'm not going to bore you with it now, because I'd rather talk about some other stuff. But look it up. It's really very interesting. So basically, a hint of that is that the character's name was Captain Marvel. So when I went to go see Shazam in the theater on Sunday, Captain Marvel was playing next door, and there were actually adults who were slightly confused as to which theater to go in because they thought they were seeing a movie about the kid who says Shazam who turns into Captain Marvel, and there's something that says Shazam and something that says Captain Marvel. Anyway, it's a long sordid history, but I just think it's funny that both of these are out at the same time. So my frame of reference for Captain Marvel, if you will, was Shazam. I thought he was called Shazam. That was the name of the show. So when I saw this trailer, I'm like, oh, they're making him into an idiot. It's just going to be some stupid kids, dumb punk kids, and just a moron superhero, and that's not what I want. Thankfully, the movie is not that. Yes, they are kids, and they're dopey and rapscallions and miscreants and all that other kind of stuff, but they're actually good kids at heart, and it is, I don't want to say realistic, it's a realistic portrayal of what a kid with superpowers would be like, because superpowers aren't real. How realistic is that going to be? It was really funny. I mean, I laughed out loud a lot throughout this movie, and most movies that are supposed to be funny don't make me laugh. It was a good-sized crowd for this, a mix of adults and kids, all of whom seemed to be really into it. I really liked it. Like, this is the first DC movie I can think of since probably Wonder Woman that I thoroughly enjoyed. The rest are just too dour for their own good. It's a lot of fun. It's basically Big meets a superhero movie. And they make a reference to that, and I'm like, okay, cool. You're admitting that you're kind of remaking Big here. It moves right along. The effects are really cool. There were a couple, for me, like damn near stand-up and cheer moments in the theater, like where I feel like if I was seeing this with an amped-up Friday night crowd, there would have been cheering in the theater. People are a little too sedate for that around here. But I really thought Shazam was a hell of a good time. I really hope this does well enough, and I think it has, to generate further films in this series. I love that it was not an end-of-the-world scenario. Too often, superhero movies, there's a universe-sucking vortex that's going to be the end of the world. Hello, Avengers. And over and over again, the end of the world gets boring. I love that this was very small stakes. This is Billy Batson as Shazam. He's trying to figure out how to get along in this body that is changing. Funny how that works for teenagers. And he has to go up against one guy, one bad guy with some hench things, which were legit pretty creepy and scary, I thought. They were really well rendered. CG I thought was good in this film, which it doesn't always. It's a little bit different. Well, if you remember the 70s show, it's super different. And let me tell you, okay, I watched about 6 episodes of the 70s show last night, which I hadn't really seen since I was a kid. And some things are best remembered from when you were a kid. Let's just say that. If you're super nostalgic, Warner Archive has them out, the whole series out on DVD. So if you want to see the original Shazam show, it's there. It was paired with ISIS, which I never really watched ISIS, but I'm pretty sure it's a pretty similar execution, only that she was a female and he was a male. At any rate, Shazam is a hell of a good time. I liked it a lot. I would actually pay to see this again. I had that much fun with it. If I could go with a kid or somebody who hasn't seen it before and maybe has expectations as low as mine were, I think I would have a good time for myself and vicariously through them. So next up, speaking of films that families should just run to, because it is a film about family. This is the latest adaptation of a Stephen King novel, previously made in 1989. Big film, big hit back then, very well regarded. Here we have 30 years later, a new take on the same material. Jason Clarke stars as a man who moves his family from the wilds of the big city in Boston to the wilds of Maine and finds out why you really don't want to be buried at a pet cemetery. So I never read the book. I read a few Stephen King books. I find Stephen King books eminently readable, but they annoy me after a while. There are certain Stephen King isms that he does that always bother me. So when I start to read his stuff again, I'm like, man, I'm breezing through this and I feel like I'm there and I feel like I can smell the location. And why did he do that again? And I don't like it when he does that. So I tend to just, I watch the movies on occasion and whatever. So there's multiple ways to approach this. So Pet Sematary was a book, which I never read. So I can't really compare the film to the book, but many others will and do. Pet Sematary was a movie in 1989. I saw that opening weekend with my mother because I wasn't old enough to get into the theater by myself. And funny enough, I saw that at this new film at Keene Cinemas Saturday. And like you care, this is on tape, whatever. I saw this movie at Keene Cinemas the other day. And Keene Cinemas was built by the same person who built the theater I grew up going to in my hometown. So interior-wise of the auditorium, it's pretty much identical. And I realized I could have actually sat in almost the exact same seat I did when I saw the original film, visually-wise. Anyway, it doesn't matter to you. Anyway, so you can compare the film to the book, and you can compare the film to the other film. It's really hard not to compare this film to the other film when that's the only other frame of reference you have. Then you can just take this movie on its own, which probably is the best way to approach this. So I saw the original when it came out. We're not reviewing the original here, I realize, but I saw the original when it came out, and I thought it was deeply disturbing. It was really disturbing. The subject matter is insanely dark. There are some really gruesome moments, and it was one that was very intense when I originally saw it as a 15-year-old, and I had it on tape, and it was a movie I hadn't revisited a lot because I remembered it as being just really unpleasant, I mean, in a good way. And I saw it again recently. The Alamo Drafthouse in Yonkers ran a triple feature on film of Cujo, Cat's Eye, and Pet Sematary. And I thought Pet Sematary was going to be was going to fare the best out of the three. And I was shocked that for me it fared the worst out of the three. The original film, it does a lot of things that I found very cheesy. Some of that is Stephen King-isms and some of it was in the execution. Some of it is from when it was made, but datedness is not really a thing to me. That's not an issue. So it's hard to not talk about this new Pet Sematary in relation to the other one. So I will and I won't. I think the acting overall is quite good in this new film. It's well shot for the most part. The big traumatic moment that sets things in motion, the big moment, not terribly well done in this film, I thought. It was a mix of like cheesy green screen and weird editing and all that, and it was almost laughable, which it shouldn't be for what is going on in it. This film does some things differently than the book and the previous film, which I personally have no problem with. I liken it to Night of the Living Dead from 1990, the Tom Savini version, which I really liked because you know Night of the Living Dead, you know it backwards and forwards. Why would you remake a film that's as perfect as that? Well, so that maybe you can do different things with it. And Savini did it well. He would lead you step by step to a moment that was iconic in the original film, then he'd go over here and do something different, and then you're like, whoa, hey, this isn't beat for beat. Anything can happen now. So this Pet Sematary does that in several different places. It does something very different in a big way that when I unfortunately heard about it, sadly the trailer gives it away. I didn't have a problem with that because I'm like, yeah, well, we have the other movie in the book. This movie will be its own thing. And that sort of works and sort of doesn't to me in this film. I don't want to say much if you haven't seen it. If you don't know anything about the plot at all, I would very much recommend going to see this because you're going to have the best experience you can. You're not going to have other things that you're constantly comparing it to in your head. I don't find evil kids scary. I find them silly and just forced for the most part. And this film has an element of evil kid in it, I will say. And at times it was okay, but at times I was just like, yeah, this is just cheesy. This is just a kid who's trying to act scary and evil, and it just doesn't work for me. There's a couple special effects moments I thought were pretty cheesy. The biggest problem for me with this movie is that I didn't feel any of it. Now, I hate to keep referring to the original, but in the original, it's a movie about grief and loss and the extremes somebody can go to try to retroactively fix things and make things right, or just the insanity that can come from extreme grief and just not wanting to believe that your situation is what it is. I didn't feel that in this movie very much. It all seems very rushed. Something really bad happens, and then the next thing you know, something else happens, and then on and on and on. And so I didn't feel the grief. I didn't feel just how heavy you felt and how just you felt as shattered as the Dale Midkiff and Denise Crosby characters in the original film. In this, I didn't feel that quite as much. The relationship between Jason Clarke, is the lead in this film, and his next door, old school main guy, John Lithgow. Originally, it was Fred Gwynne in the '89 film, and seeing it again, I felt he was just like super cartoony. His main accent was like, it was like he just walked off the set of the Mainsters or something. It was really ridiculous. In this, John Lithgow seemed much more realistic, but at the same time, the relationship between those two guys, the two neighbors, it didn't really feel like it was there. You didn't like him as much as you did Fred Gwynne. You didn't really feel for him as much. You didn't feel much of his backstory, or indeed even much of the backstory of the titular Pet Sematary. I will say the stuff with the cat is really well done. Church the cat, if you recall from the original film, this I will say, the cat gets hit by a truck and they bury him in the Pet Sematary and he comes back to life. That worked really well in this, and that did seem to take its time and felt organic. I liked the cat. The cat is the star of this movie. There are actually photos from the premiere of this film where the cat of the film was sitting on a pedestal with a little clip-on necktie, and it was like a photo op for everybody, which I thought was pretty brilliant. Anyway, I don't want to spend the whole time on Pet Sematary. I didn't really like it that much in the long run. I went into it with open arms because I thought the original wasn't that great in retrospect for me, so maybe this one will do it better. I really think this is a tale that if you want to do it properly, you need to do one of two things. You either need to tell the entire story as was written, which is more than you can do in a movie, and you need to put it out as like a Netflix limited series at 8 or 10 parts. Give it hours and hours to really let it breathe, like they did with 11/22/63. Or you streamline this. You streamline it. You knock out the stuff about the deformed sister in the past and the ghost college student, which totally were distracting to me. Those really stood out, especially the college student thing. Seemed super Stephen King-y and really lame to me in the original film. And in the new film, again, it just seemed like, what is this? It seemed unrealistic. In a film about reanimating people and animals, a ghost seemed unrealistic to me. But you either really streamline it and just focus on the whole Pet Sematary and this family and the next door neighbor, or you blow it way open and tell the whole story. So I don't know. I've heard various things from various people who've seen this. Some really liked it. Some really hated it. I welcome your comments about it. If you do go see this, send me an email at movies@cheshiretv.org and let me know what you thought, because it's interesting to see how different people react to what is exactly the same material. Speaking of unrealistic, we now move on to a film that is not. This is actually realistic. This is based on a true story. And I just looked it up, and it's actually accurately based on a true story. This is a film about Durham, North Carolina. I think I got that right. In the early 1970s, racial tensions, school integration. Two people need to get it together to try to solve this problem. One is a leader of the black community, and one is a leader of the Klan. So you can't get a whole lot more opposite than that. And they become, through hook and crook, the best of enemies. Just wanted to reflect upon that tender moment in the trailer there for a second. So this is a story that I was unaware of, true story. Apparently there's a documentary about this featuring the actual people, and you see clips of that in the end credits, which is something I love in a true story film. I do love seeing the real people, whether they're giving you, the PS, what happened after the tales of the film, or you just get to see what they look and sound like. It's interesting. So you have Taraji P. Henson, who's so good. You don't even think you're looking at this same woman who's in all these other shows and all these other films. You're looking at the woman she's supposed to be in this film, who's Anne Atwater, and she's a local activist. But a lot of it is about housing, fair housing, and just making sure people don't get hosed. And then you have C.P. Ellis. Thank you, Sam Rockwell, who's the local head of the Klan, and he doesn't want anybody who's not Christian and white anywhere near him or his family or his school. And basically the story of the film is there's a fire in the black folk school, and they're like, yeah, we really can't occupy this place anymore, or we are, and the building's still smoking. So maybe we could put everybody in the same building. And the white folk did not want that to happen, so they basically decided to settle it with a charrette, which is something I've only ever heard the name of, and it sounds like either a very tiny something that you smoke, or something that has a hint of mint in it. I'm not sure, or perhaps both. And they basically have this big discussion with townspeople and a board and all this other stuff, and try to settle on this issue of whether the school is going to be integrated or not. And half want it and half don't, and both halves don't like each other all that much for the most part. So it's an interesting story of opposites having to work together, attempting to work together despite hating each other, and possibly finding common ground here and there. It's one of those stories that when you see this, it's a little shocking to see relatively how not long ago it took place. It was 71, I believe. Music in the film is very good. It very much has a good sense of place. And it's just really well done. I didn't think this was great. Like, this didn't make me want to stand up and cheer, but this is another movie that, when everything else in the theater, every other slot is filled with a superhero movie, a remake, a sequel, or an adaptation of a video game or a comic book, a movie about people's kind of nice once in a while. Movie about grown-ups, even though it's all about the kids, but this is a movie about the grown-ups. I thought it was really good. This is one for the grown-ups. It was probably will not hang in theaters too long. It's not awards season, so it's not going to get. I think it's award worthy, but I don't think it's going to get a lot of push that, award nominations and stuff tend to keep movies afloat in the theater for a long time. So I would say if you like an interesting fact-based historical film about grown-ups and about something that might make you feel a little bit better about the world when it's over, Best of Enemies is certainly a good choice, and that's probably I'm going to guess is going to kick around for a few weeks until the next, until Avengers comes out. That's probably going to push everything else out that's not about superheroes. That is all we have in the theaters at the moment. I wanted to see one more film, but I just did not have time, and I will hopefully catch that on video. We won't talk about what it is so that you feel a little bit less disappointment. We now move on to that which you can see on home video on the device or platform or service or format of your choice. First up is, what is it? Oh yeah, that one. This will be short. This is a film about a little puppy dog, little doggy. It's a little dog, it tries to get along, but unfortunately, it gets separated from its people. So this is the story of A Dog's Journey Home. And if there was any question as to whether the dog finds its way home, that trailer pretty much took care of that for you, didn't it? But those of you on YouTube, you have no idea what I'm saying, and you'll probably enjoy the film a little bit more on that cause. So this is another film that's sort of like a Milo and Otis or a Homeward Bound or a Benji movie, where you have this cute little dog, and through circumstance he gets separated from his owner, and then the rest of the film is this dog, the adventures it gets to in trying to find its way back home to its owner. Totally inoffensive movie, very much for kids and families. The story is this young guy finds this dog in a building that's sort of condemned or about to be torn down, or a litter of dogs. He saves the dog. Not supposed to have the dog. His mother is a vet, not veterinarian. She's a veteran who has PTSD, so the dog winds up going to the veterans hospital and just being sort of like not a service dog, or just sort of like a buddy for everybody there. And that was surprising to me. I didn't expect this film was going to kind of tackle that issue, but it's nice, and it's an issue and one worth tackling. So it's not really what the majority of the film is about, but that theme is kind of there and very respectful. And in lots of great outdoor shots. The dog does narrate its own story. I didn't quite know how to take that when it started. It is kind of cutesy, and maybe a little more cutesy than I enjoy, but it is occasionally funny at times. And it's just a decent little film. I don't really have much to say about it than that. It's a great family film, and if you like dogs, I can't imagine you wouldn't like this. Some of the CGI to me on some of the animals it meets in the wild are a little fakey, but for the most part, the whole thing looks pretty good. So we're going to move on, because I have stuff that I really want to talk about more than what I am talking about right now. Up next, Will Wiffle over here. This is a film that stars Steve Carell, another based on a true story film, maybe a little bit less accurate than Best of Enemies was. There's also a documentary about the same film too, about the same story too, so you can actually have a very, very accurate portrayal or this somewhat more fanciful take on the tale by Robert Zemeckis, who gave us I Want to Hold Your Hand. No, he gave us Back to the Future. You know Back to the Future, so he gave us Back to the Future. And it's the tale of a man who has suffered head trauma and basically tries to enact his trauma and get through and discover who he is after suffering memory loss. No head trauma here. He devises this little world with action figures and dolls that's sort of like this little World War II drama. And basically, if you go to his house, he will say to you, this is really terrible, "Welcome to Marwen."
G.I. Joe attack! Boom, boom! G.I. Joe takes the hill! Bam, bam! Horrific battle!
This was really good. This is not a comedy. I saw this in the theater, and Mother had brought young children to see it, and I thought, you probably got the wrong impression from those trailers. This is a drama. This is a pretty heavy drama. There are these action sequences featuring the animated dolls, which is really interesting, and it looked not quite like something I've ever seen before. Basically, the guy has suffered this trauma, and he basically sets up all these little scenes, and it's this ongoing story with these World War II dolls and models and things like that. And he takes still photos of them, which is real. This guy really does this, and he's had museum exhibitions of his photos, including at the local college art gallery in town here pretty recently. So it is going back and forth between his little fantasy world of these people that are inspired by the people who've helped him in his life and the bad guys who did this bad thing to him, and how he's just trying to get along in life leading up to a trial or sentencing for these guys who did this to him. So the big question is he going to be able to show up to testify and put these guys away, or is he too traumatized to do that? So Steve Carell is very good. Everybody in this film is very good. It's very unusual. It's not inaccessible unusual. It's just visually, it's like Hollywood blockbuster visuals in a very small story, which you don't often get. So this didn't really do all that well in the theater, but I hope it finds its audience on video because it's really well done. Okay, I went through all that stuff to get to this one. We'll swing over here because we'll get a drum roll. Okay, no drum roll. So this is a film, I've been joking about reviewing this. I'm going to review this totally unbiased because I'm actually in it. And it's about people, it's about some of my best friends. It's a movie I know very, very There we go. See, that helped me. See, I don't have another guy to play off anymore, so I can't, collect my thoughts. So I just ramble, as you probably well know. So this is the story of the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. This is the drive-in that I drive 6 hours to every weekend to spend my time and work for free because I love it and the people and the movies so much. Filmmaker Alexander Manelli from Lancaster, Pennsylvania stopped on by for about a season or so to cover the drive-in and tell the story of how this drive-in theater became what it was. Basically, the story is all the theaters were going digital in this country. You had to spend 50 to 100 grand for a digital projector, and this little drive-in in a quiet corner of Pennsylvania didn't have the money to do that. So what they decided to do was to stay as a 35 millimeter drive-in and just play old movies and try to set themselves apart that way. At any rate, this is the story of what goes on at the drive-in. So I'm not biased. No, I'm not unbiased. Right. I'm biased on this film. I'm in this film. I love this movie. This movie is great. I've seen it I counted the other day. I've seen this 8 times and I'll keep watching it because, okay, imagine this. Imagine you've taken most of your life to find your perfect place and your perfect people and the place that makes you happiest in life. Yes, it's 6 hours away. And then, and you have a great time there, and it's kind of, it's what everything, working for the weekend, that's what it is. Imagine somebody then shows up and makes a beautiful documentary about what's going on with you and your friends. That's pretty great. So I can never be unbiased about this. I always say, I'm too close to this to really say whether it's good or bad, but I can tell you, it is a beautiful love letter to a couple summers I spent a few years ago and the way I continue to spend my summers for as long as I'm on 2 feet. So basically the story is, as I said a little bit, this drive-in is in trouble. It's not doing well with first-run films. Hollywood is saying you need to go digital or go out of business, and they decide to do something different. So this story is it starts off as the story of, is this place going to make it or not, by showing old movies on film, which is, an obsolete technology theoretically, and films that everybody's already seen before. But then it becomes something else. It really becomes more a story of the three, Matt, Virgil, and Jeff, the three people who are the guys who are behind this drive-in, taking this direction. And what kind of people are they, and what are the passions that drive them to do this sort of thing? And what are the passions that drive all of us who are involved to go and spend all of our time and money out of pocket sometimes to do this for free? And it's a love of movies. So as other people have said, smarter and better with words than I, it is a love letter to the movie-going experience. It is about just passion and finding that which you figure out who you are in life, and this is a place where you can go and be that, surrounded by other people who are that same thing. It's really, really well shot. It was all done by one guy, one dude with his digital camera, and it's beautiful. And I've seen this on a big screen. This looks gorgeous. It's one guy shot, edited, directed. He was the guy holding the microphone, the recorder when we did the audio commentaries for this. It's Al. It's all Al. Big Al did the whole thing. So it's a good film. It's won awards, so other people think it's good, not just me, not just the people who are in it. I think if you love drive-ins, this is a beautiful film to watch. If you like movies, this is a cool film. And if you like movies, it's been kind of compared to Clerks to a degree. Wacky characters hanging out at the workplace kind of thing. I can't say much more about it than that. As far as the extras on this disc, MVD has this disc out on Tuesday. You have 3 audio commentaries. Basically, we went down to the drive-in on a very cold day in, I think, January. Jeff had the space heaters, and we sat in the projection booth and watched the film on a laptop, and we all recorded commentaries. So there's one commentary with most of the hardcore principals, the people who have been working there the longest, and then another commentary with the rest of us who are a little bit newer, and Jeff is on both of those. And then you have a commentary with Al, the director, who is also on the other 2, and Robert, who's another one of our gang who couldn't make it to the first session. And I thought it was all very interesting. Part of it is the mechanics. I love commentaries on documentaries because you get the story behind the story, and you get additional funny stories from everybody involved. I thoroughly enjoyed all 3 commentaries, not just the one that I was on. You have 17 minutes of deleted scenes. You have like a 20 or 30 minute Q&A we did at the Alamo Drafthouse Yonkers, which was, for me, a pretty amazing moment because I was sitting in my favorite indoor theater watching a movie about my favorite outdoor theater. So that was pretty cool. And there's plenty of goodies on this. So I'm not going to go on and on because I'm just going to tell you about how great this theater is and how great this film is. And by default, it's pretty much all saying how great I am, isn't it? So we'll move on to the Arrow Video Corner, which is, there we are, my favorite part of the show. We have 2 titles. Oh, right, in The Exorcism. We have 2 titles this week. First of which is another Giallo film, which I'm a big fan of. This is one I had heard the title of because it's a title you don't forget. And, hi. You. We have a film that stars Anton Diffring and who else? Dagmar Lysander and other people you probably have never heard of, in a tale of murder and perversity and mayhem and madness, and it takes place in Ireland. This film is entitled The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire. So I've said many times, I love the fact that Arrow is putting all of these giallos out. I love giallos, I love spaghetti westerns. They are a genre that, even if they're not that, if the individual film is not that great, they have the trappings of the films that I like. So this is a fine example. You open with this really brutal, gross murder of somebody like out of the gate, and you're like, wow, you got my attention with that slashing and acid killing. And then you have a score by Stelvio Cipriani, who's really good. So like, even if if I had been struck blind, I would have still enjoyed this film just for the soundtrack alone. Unusual in that this is shot in Ireland. A lot of it's shot in Dublin, which is atypical. Usually the giallo films were Rome. They're Italian movies. Once in a great while, they would go to another country. They'd be co-production, so maybe you'd shoot it in Germany, or you'd shoot a little in America, but pretty much they were always Rome-based. So to see one that's set in Italy, sorry, didn't have my ice cream today. To see one that's shot in Ireland is unusual, especially there's a really gorgeous scene along this cliffside, these cliffs with the ocean beneath them. It was just really like majestic and impressive, and not what you expect in a film like this. And then there's some like palatial estates that are kind of cool. It's a different kind of exoticism than I'm used to for my Italian giallo films. So you have basically the storyline is this woman gets killed, and she turns out to be the mistress of the some foreign ambassador played by Anton Diffring, whose name you might not know, but you might recognize his face. He was a German actor, so he tended to play Nazis, but he had a very interesting look about him, and he's the suspect el numero uno in this film, but then as the film goes along, you kind of suspect everybody here and there, and you're not quite sure which way it's going to go. There are multiple murders throughout to maintain your interest if you're a bloodthirsty scoundrel like I am. They're very, very gory at times, like shockingly brutal at times. Kind of cheap, but gory, so it's like the gore is shocking, but at the same time you're like, well, that's totally fake. So you can kind of enjoy it, if that's the word. Pace very uneven on this one. I didn't love this one. I was interesting. The music kept me going, and trying to figure out who did it kept me going, but it wasn't one of the greats for me. The title is one of the things I love about Giallo films is they have these really crazy ornate titles. The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire. My notes right here, I'm not going to claim ownership of this, as the notes from Arrow and MVD said, it's sort of inspired by the bird with the crystal plumage and all those other animal-related sounding titles that came along in the wake of Crystal Plumage. You have a ton of extras on this, like more extras than I can handle. Like I actually exclaimed out loud when I kept paging downward and the extras kept going. So you have reflections and appreciations of the film and the composer and interviews with various people who were involved in the film and on and on and on and on. This is one of those things where I have my stack of films I need to watch each week for the show, and then next to those they go in the stack of the extras that I want to eventually get around to watching, because I try to watch as many extras as I can to comment on them for the show, but sometimes there's just like the length of the extras is a multiple of the length of the movie. It just you can't get through it all. So that is out. That is out now. You also, I should point out, for your convenience or perusal, there are two versions of the film. I say two versions. It's the same film, but you can watch it in English or Italian, which a lot of these do. So you'll have either the English titles and an English dub of the film, or you'll have the original Italian titles and the Italian dub of the film. Some people have a preference one way or the other. A lot of these films were shot without sync sound anyway, with different cast members speaking different languages, so there's not always one true version of it. I tend to lean, I've been poo-pooed, I tend to lean toward the English version just because sometimes I'm lazy, and sometimes I actually like hearing the familiar voices of the sound dubbers that they used to use for like all these films back then. So I can watch a film and I'd be like, oh yeah, she was the voice of of Teresa Russell not Teresa Russell. She was the voice of so and so in a Dario Argento movie. And then she was the voice of somebody else in this and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. It's the little games I play to amuse myself. Anyway, on to the final film we have for this week. Also an Arrow title. This is an Arrow Academy title. Arrow Academy is the classy version of Arrow. Arrow Academy puts out more of the art house films or the documentaries or the a little bit more high-minded than a lot of what Arrow usually puts out. So Arrow Academy has this out. This is a film by Alain Resnais, who's a director whose name I know more than whose work I know. It's a film based on a play from the 1920s about basically a love triangle. It's a very small cast. You have a man and his wife and a friend of the man, and the friend of the man gets involved with the wife, and complications and a whole lot of sorrow ensues in a film entitled Melo. We keep each other on our toes here, although I'm on my tuchus most of the time. This is a film I'd never heard of. This is Alain Resnais, I just looked, was last year at Marienbad. Very big film in the early 60s he did, or maybe late 60s. It was in the 60s, okay? This is a film that is very, it opens with like a proscenium arch and a curtain, and the curtain parts, and it's not shot like a play. It's not shot as though you're watching it on a stage, but it is very simplistically shot, which is not a bad thing. Very, very small cast. At any given time, there's only 2, maybe 3. I don't think maybe more than 3 people in any given scene. And I think I only recall the camera going outside once. There was one sequence out of doors, but otherwise it's very contained. I didn't know anything about this going in, so when I turned it on, it's just 3 people talking in French at a dinner table for a long time, and I'm thinking, this might be a rough go for me. This might not be something that's really for me. And it's funny how often I'll feel that when I'm watching something. I'll watch it and I'll be like, I don't know how can I make it to the end of this? And then the acting is really good, and the music and the story is really good, and it just draws me in. And that's what happened with this. fully expected this might be the kind of film that I might just shut off and cut my losses, but no, it became very interesting. It's slow, but as these people's lives get more and more complicated, the drama gets ratcheted way up. Now, it's not like somebody jumping a dirt bike onto a train kind of excitement, but it is, when is the other shoe going to drop in this story? It's a bad situation for everybody involved. Nobody really wants to hurt anybody, but it's hurtful all around. And where does it ultimately go? I don't really want to say where it ultimately goes. Should you want to watch this film, as I always say, I feel like anything is best experienced going in as blind as possible. I don't know that you're going to drop Aerodisc money for a blind purchase, but if you like the director or it sounds interesting enough to you, you might. But it's very well done and classy, and it's interesting because when I realized, okay, this feels like it was based on a play, and it's being staged very simplistically. I mean, the sets are really nice, but they're just little rooms for the most part. I wondered, is he going to shoot this like a play in that, it's just going to be camera bolted to the floor? There's not a lot of flashy camera anything. It's very simple, but it's a very subdued technique that doesn't get in the way of just the actors and what's going on. I can't say I'd heard of any of these actors as far as I know or seen them before. So to me, they were the characters in the film. They were very, very compelling. It was really well done and really good. And by the end of the movie, again, it's so quiet and it's just conversations between people. There's no action per se, almost at all. It's really moving and powerful. This is a really well done film. This is from 1986. And something I just knew nothing about. So I'm really glad I got a chance to see this. This is the kind of film I would have loved to have been able to see in the theater. When I was a kid, I was hour and a half from Dartmouth, and this is the kind of thing the Dartmouth Film Society used to show all the time. They would show old classics and weird stuff and the occasional goofy movie, but then they would also show like stone cold foreign film classics. And once in a great while I would go and see something and it was really cool. And this is the kind of film that sort of brought me back to that. This is the kind of thing I would love to see in some, quiet city, not urban, but metropolitan multiplex art house kind of thing. This is also a pretty, it's not loaded with extras like Iguana was, but it was frankly more extras than I cared to experience. It's an audio interview with the director, and I believe audio interviews with the entire cast and some of the creative team, and then the trailers, and a still gallery. So it's not, days worth of viewing, but if you like the movie, it's the people who were involved with it talking about it, which is pretty cool. So that is out now. That, Iguana with the Tongue of Fire at the Drive-In and Melo are all out now from MVD/Arrow, and available for your dancing pleasure, as it were. That's all I have to really talk about Mushmouth today. I'm sorry. Next week we have the latest incarnation of Hellboy. I don't know enough about it to know if this is a restarting of the whole story, or I think it kind of is, or if it's just another sequel. But we have a new Hellboy movie with a different cast. We have The Missing Link with Hugh Jackman voicing a abominable snowman, Yeti, Bigfoot kind of animated film from the people who brought us other things that were good. I can't remember, but when I saw who did it, I'm like, oh, I said, this movie doesn't look very good. And then I saw the company that put it out. It might be Leica, I think. And I'm like, oh, they make great films. I'm now excited about this. And then on video, we have Kid Who Would Be King, Glass, Keoma, and particular excitement for me, Master of Dark Shadows, which is a Dan Curtis documentary about Dan Curtis, who created Dark Shadows, and it's essentially a 90-minute in-depth Dark Shadows documentary, which is pretty cool. So until then, I will remain Mark, and I will be the Cinemaniac, and I will say see you later, and maybe next week I'll be more coherent. Bye.